Hello, Ms. Daniels.
Hello.
Could you please state your full name, date of birth, and where you were born?
Okay, my name is Christine Larissa. Neal is my maiden name, Neal Daniels. I was born in Gainesville, Florida on Northwest Seminary Lane on October 19, 1940. The house where I was born is still standing.
Seminary Lane is, where is that?
It's off of Fifth Avenue, Northwest Fifth Avenue,
Right.
Northwest section.
Okay. Where did you go to elementary school?
I went to Williams Elementary School from 1st through 6th grade at the time, and there wasn't kindergarten. At least Williams didn't have a kindergarten class, so I went to 1st grade there.
So this is like 1945, 55, that area?
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There was in the middle school. From Williams, I went to Lincoln High School, which was 7th through 12th grade.
Do you remember your teachers?
Yes. My 1st grade teacher was Mrs. Altemise Cook, who was also the principal's wife. The principal was Mr. Gaston Cook. And my 2nd grade teacher was Juanita Coleman. I was in 2nd grade for about 2 weeks, and then I was sent to 3rd grade. And I'll go back and explain that a little later. My 3rd grade teacher was Miss Kelsey, Mamie Kelsey, I believe her first name was. 4th grade, Miss Glover, I believe. 5th grade is a blur, but 6th grade was Miss Christola Jones. I still hear from her every Christmas. I met Miss Jones when I was a very little girl, and during that time, teachers would pool, going to school. There would be maybe 5 teachers in one car. One person would pick up everyone. And my aunt, Jessie West, she was a teacher at Williams at the time, and she had a car, so she picked up several other teachers, and I rode with them to Williams. At the time, my mother was teaching in Rochelle, Florida, and but I went to Williams along with my aunt. And Miss Christola Jones greeted me every morning very sweetly, hello, baby dear, and her arms were always outstretched, for me to get in the car. Usually I was in tears in the morning, so she was comforting.
Go ahead and explain how you managed to only have 2 weeks of 2nd grade.
My mother taught in a one-room school in Rochelle. There were 2 teachers in this school, my mother and another teacher. Her name, I can't think of her name right now, but it will probably come to me. And she took me to school with her. There weren't any daycare centers or anything like that, so I started going with her maybe 2 or 3 years old, and I was in a playpen in the back of the classroom. And so I started learning from that pen. And so when I started 1st grade, I was very well equipped. In fact, Mrs. Cook said that I requested cursive writing in 1st grade. Asked her, would she please teach me how to gather my name? That was the word that I used.
Can you describe kind of what Williams was like physically?
Well, there was one unit that I remember. As you entered, the office was at the left, and there were 6 classrooms, and the teacher's bathroom was a combination bathroom lounge, and then there were lavatories for the girls and one for the boys. But there were just 6 classrooms.
Right.
1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade.
A playground?
That I remember. Yes, there was a playground on the outside. We didn't have any playground equipment, as I remember. We played a lot of ring plays such as Little Sally Walker, London Bridge, Bluebird, and dodgeball, things like that. Our lunches were brought with us. However, milk was furnished. I can vaguely remember chocolate milk and white milk in little cardboard cartons.
Right.
So, but we did bring our lunches. Later, when I started to teach there, we had a really fine cafeteria, and Miss Susie Stover was the cafeteria manager at the time. But I can't remember if we had a cafeteria when I went to school there. I can remember taking a lunch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Air conditioning and heating?
Heating, but no air conditioning. And the heaters were radiator. I remember the radiators against the wall. The hallway was concrete. I remember that concrete floor in the hallway. I can remember being afraid of seeing a snake, when we went outside, because around that school then was like a wooded area that, there weren't houses or cleared areas at that time.
Right. Yeah, see, so many of our students come from Lincoln Estates.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't there.
No.
That was all woods.
Mm-hmm.
What was there in the neighborhood?
I can remember homes on that side of Waldo Road. On the other side of Waldo Road were a couple of businesses. But on that side, I can only remember one corner store that, and this was after we moved in East Gainesville. We moved there when I was in 7th grade. My mother's brother built a home for us himself, one man, and it was on the corner of 2nd and 13th Street. In fact, the address is 222 Southeast 13th Street. And there was a corner store about a block from where I lived there. But like I said, this was during the period that I was teaching at Williams. My first teaching job was at Fessenden Academy, just north of Ocala. And it was a rural district. All of the children were bused to school. And I taught there for 1 year. My mother at that time was teaching at Williams. She taught 1st grade at Williams. My aunt Jessie West, I'm not sure, she may have been a 5th grade teacher at the time. And my 2nd grade teacher was also my cousin, Juanita Coleman. So I wasn't hired that very first year. That would have been a little question of nepotism, I think, So even though when I graduated from Bethune-Cookman, at that time, teachers had to pass the National Teacher Examination in order to be hired. So I was fortunate enough to, I took it the first time at my junior year in college, and then I missed it by about 3 points, and then my senior year I passed it. So I was well equipped when I came out of college. But like I said, I taught at Fessenden, even though I applied at Williams. But in the meantime, I started Fessenden September 1st, and September 30th, my mother died. So the following year, I was asked to come to Williams to teach, and I did. And I taught 1st grade there. And of course, my 1st grade teacher is still there. Miss Kelsey, my 5th grade teacher, Miss Jones, many of my teachers were there. I take it back, it wasn't the first year that I taught 1st grade. I taught an accelerated 5th grade the first year. I replaced Miss Glover, who retired. And that accelerated class might have been sort of experimental, but they were super bright kids, in that class, very competitive. They loved science and science experiments, and we did a lot of things, a lot of the animals I was afraid of, but we did the experiments, and they would bring in snakes and any kind of animal that, they could find. And one of the students that was in that class that I know of as an attorney now, they went on to do really great things that whole class. But like I said, they were very, very competitive and were really interested in a lot of science experiments. I had to deal with the frogs and freezing them in a coffee can, and then taking him out after he was frozen and, and watch him as he thawed out and his body parts were, working again, and he flipped over. It was amazing, but I was young and willing to try anything, and I just adored my job. I loved what I was doing. And my sixth grade teacher, Miss Jones, occasionally would drop in my classroom, and she called me baby dear, as she did when I was very little, and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry," but that was okay too. One thing I can remember about Williams, I had a student that came to school with no shoes. He was from the neighborhood, and he really didn't want to come to school. This was the beginning of the school year. So I had two sisters who had to bring him in. One had his shoulders, the other had his feet, and he was, just stretched out, eyes closed tight. He didn't even want to see where he was going. And it was really hilarious, but on several occasions we've had children with no shoes. But Miss Kelsey she had a way of making children feel special. I don't care what they were wearing or not wearing, She had little pet names for them, and, I don't care how despondent they looked, she could always manage a smile. She collected dogs and kids, and, she was just special, genuine person. The interesting part about those years at Williams, I lived in the neighborhood. I walked to school, and I taught a lot of neighborhood children. And the very first day of school, this adorable little boy came in and he said, "Hi, Chris," into my classroom. So he called me Chris the entire year. That's all he knew. I've been Chris to him all of his life, so didn't really matter, but it was just so adorable to hear him say, "Hi, Chris." He was really happy to see me. Yeah.
What year were you a teacher?
I have to go back and think. This may have been 64, 65. Dates elude me.
How many years were you at Williams as a teacher?
I made tenure there, so maybe
3,
4.
4.
Four,
3 or 4.
yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. 3 or 4 years.
Has teaching changed much since then?
Oh, yes. Uh-huh. There were no quarterly topic plans, district inventory tests. Of course, we had standardized tests, but district inventory tests, benchmarks, co-basal series, and we had one basic text, and that was probably Sally, Dick, and Jane. And I learned to read by sight. I don't remember myself phonetics. Now, when I started teaching, yes, we were using old tag series. Are you familiar with tag? Tag series. It was a phonetic-based series to teach reading. And I used that during my internship. I did my internship at Acorn Jones Elementary, which was the high school that I attended from 7th through 12th grade. But when I came out of college, I don't remember if the elementary school was there before college, but I did my internship at Akron Jones Elementary, and that was when I was first introduced to the phonetic based series.
Well, how did you know what to teach then? If you didn't have all of those benchmarks and the district inventory tests and...
If I'm not mistaken, we had something that was called reasonable expectations for first graders, second graders, a list of reasonable expectations. So you did have, it wasn't mapped out for you like a quarterly topic plan where you're going to teach this skill for until children master it and you're going to go to the next, it wasn't mapped out like that.
Right.
And we kept a register for attendance and lesson plans, yes. And I'm not sure, we may have started with behavioral objectives during that time. And when I left Florida, I went to New Jersey. I taught in New Jersey for 32 years. Wasn't actually in the classroom for that long, but my teaching career continued there after I left Florida.
Was there a difference between what school was like when you were a student at Williams and then as a teacher at Williams? Or was it pretty much the same?
I suppose it was pretty much the same. There weren't many discipline problems when I attended or when I taught at Williams. Parents were really interested in their children, and I knew so many of my parents. Some were, students, kids that I went to school with, and they were just receptive. We visited every child's home during that time that was required. And that started when I was doing my student teaching. I was required to visit every child's home. And you really looked at that child differently after you visited the child's home. And usually the parents went all out to make you welcome. When my first year teaching, and I was teaching at Fessenden, one of my parents gave me a live turkey for Thanksgiving. And I told her I didn't know what to do with the turkey, so I said, you'll have to, and of course they dressed the turkey and brought it back to me. But just a genuine, interest and respect for the teacher.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that was the same, both when you were a student and
yes.
as a teacher
mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm.
What was the punishment for misbehavior for students at that time?
Now, contrary to what I read recently, I don't remember spankings. You get spankings from your parents. If you misbehaved, that message got to your house before you did after school. How, when some of us didn't have phones, it got there so fast, I don't know. But I know that happened to me a couple of times when I was in high school, and the message was at my house before I got home that I had misbehaved in one of my classes.
What'd you do?
It was roll call, and we had roll by number, 1, 2, and I said something smart instead of saying my number, and I got in trouble.
What do you think, for our students who see Williams and see the school system the way that it is today, what do you think that is important for them to understand about Williams?
I think they're very blessed because they have a lot of materials, a variety of reading books, library books, things like that. We did have a library, but they have so much more than we had, and I just like to see them take advantage of that. Not that you can't make it with less, because I did. But we had very, very dedicated teachers who gave us everything they had to give. And during that time, the teachers had to renew their certificates, I believe, every 5 or 6 years. And I know my mother went to Syracuse some summers, and my aunt and some of the other teachers would go to Syracuse University in the summer. And one summer, the summer before my mother died, she went to Marquette University in Wisconsin, to take courses to renew their certificates. But everything that they had, they gave it to us, and we were receptive.
Why is that different today?
I don't know. I often tell people that I know we were poor, but I didn't know it until I became an adult. And today I went past the house where I grew up, and I said it seems so much bigger when I was a little girl, than it does now.
Yeah.
But I think it was the family structure, close-knit family, and the community was an extension of your family. If a neighbor saw you doing something wrong, it's just like your mom or dad seeing it. And anytime you were in distress, there was always a neighbor to help you. My first year at Bethune-Cookman College, well, it's university now, the dormitory burned, the freshman dormitory, and everything that I had was destroyed. And my next door neighbor went to work, and he said my daughter was in a fire at a dormitory, and collected donations and brought them to my mother, to help me replace some of the things that I lost. And of course the teachers at Williams really rallied around her. They gave her, there was the Wilson department store downtown Gainesville. They gave her their charge cards and said, get whatever she needs, It was really wonderful how they all came together to help. But that was the kind of community it was at that time. Everybody knew everybody. I don't know my neighbors. I lived in New Jersey. The development that I came here from, I didn't know my next door neighbors. I was there 11 years and I didn't know them. It wasn't like that then. You knew everyone, and as I answered in one of the questions, we didn't lock doors. I can remember coming home and finding the kids from in back in my house waiting for me, sitting quietly waiting for me to get home. So I didn't lock the door. It's a lot different today.
Yeah.
I often wonder, though, when I think of the science labs today with all of the equipment, and it would have been nice if I had had this available to me. I may have been a rocket scientist. I got this far with just bare minimals. We always got books that were used, and a lot of times pages were torn out. Sometimes almost deliberate, the last page, so we would not know how the story ended. The desks were marked. When other schools got new ones, we got those that were left over. My teachers used magazines. They were very innovative. You know, that was a strategy that I used when I started teaching, taking a picture from a magazine, a really busy picture, and having each child tell me something that was in that picture. And I'd write that child's sentence down and its initials next to it. And at the end of that session, you know, I would call who can come up and read their own sentence. Or can you read yours and someone else's? Sometimes they would read that person and they would know by the initials who the others. And eventually, by the end of the week, they were reading the whole story. And the vocabulary was their vocabulary, you know, regardless how, well, they're called experimental stories now, I think. I'm not sure. But we used that.
Right.
We tore apart books and took the child's interpretation of the picture and wrote it underneath the picture.
So when you were teaching too, you were getting used materials? Or was it getting better then?
I never remember being a part of a textbook committee, selection committee here in Florida. When I went to New Jersey, yes. You know, teachers were actively involved in selecting textbooks. And we were actively involved in deciding the co-basal series, whether we had whole language, whatever. And teachers wrote the curriculums during the summer. So I was very actively involved there. But here, I don't remember.
What was your favorite subject to teach?
Reading.
Reading.
Mm.
And you mostly did upper grades?
No.
No. Yeah.
That 5th grade class that I had the first year at Williams was the only upper grade that I taught. 15 years in New Jersey, I taught first grade. Second, a couple of years, and then I went into a reading center. Then I became a reading and math center teacher, then a mentor teacher where I trained new teachers for 3 years on the job in their classrooms. And after that, I was a school facilitator.
How many brothers and sisters?
I have one brother and one sister. My brother is 10 years older than I, and my sister 8 years older.
You're the baby. Okay. And what did your folks do when?
My mom, I don't ever remember her doing anything other than teach. And my father was a shoe repairman. He had his own business in Alachua, and he would drive those 16 miles every day to Alachua to repair shoes. He started out as a shoe shine boy and worked his way up until he had his own business.
Did your folks come from Gainesville?
My father was from Alachua. He grew up, he was born in Alachua. So was his sister, my aunt that taught at Williams, Jessie. She was from Alachua. But my mother was from Ocala. That's her home. And in fact, it's a little town outside of Ocala called Shady Grove. That's where she was from. And that's where she's buried now, Shady Grove.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share like some of the, some of the styles and trends that caught your fancy as you were going through your...
We had some shoes called white bucks that were popular. They were like sort of like a suede, I believe, shoe, and of course the black and white Oxford that we polished, and when the polish dried, took a cloth and shined them. And of course the bobby socks, we would sometimes put, when the rubber in the socks would wear, We would pull them all the way up, put a rubber band halfway around, fold them so that they would stay in place. And of course, wide skirts, felt skirts with poodles and appliques. Those I can remember on the front of them.
What about music?
I played in the band from 7th through 12th grade at Lincoln High School. Mr. Miller was my band director. And I was an adult before I really appreciated him to his fullest. When I could recognize El Capitan and overtures that he taught us or that we played, I realized how he expanded what he did with us. They weren't just simple little, but really wonderful overtures and marches.
Right.
And the fact that I can, William Tell's overture and things like that, that I can, go through completely, you don't appreciate that until you understand it. You're an adult and you hear it again. And I stop sometimes and say, he was amazing that he could get us to do this. And we won a lot of championships, and doing band competitions.
Right. What was your instrument?
Clarinet.
What was the church that you belonged to?
Church of Christ. It's a little building that still sits across from the old train station on the northwest section. The church's name has changed, but it was non-denominational. There was no piano, but the music was really beautiful. The songs I sing today in church, I can almost hear my mom's voice as I'm singing them. I can remember hearing her sing them when I was a little girl. We went to St. Augustine often because my sister lived with my aunt and grandmother, my mother's mother and sister in St. Augustine. She grew up there, so we visited quite often on the weekends and holidays. And my aunt was very strict. She taught us all of the social graces, how to set a table, put your glass at the tip of this. We went through that every Sunday. We polished silver on Saturday for Sunday. Sunday was white linen tablecloth, white linen napkins, stem glassware, the best china, every Sunday. And my sister and I laughed today, so we used to have Mass before we would eat. We called it Mass because it was so long. She would read the scripture first, my auntie, sometimes a whole chapter. And then my uncle would pray. He was on the opposite end of the table. And then everyone said a Bible verse. We went around the table. Then she would pray again. By that time, the food was cold. But my grandmother, who was really a comical person, her scripture was Jesus wept. If you wanted to get in trouble, you say Jesus wept before it got to her. You in deep trouble. But the funny part about it is she would sometimes start eating while we were still saying Bible verses. And I would sit, with one eye like this watching her, because she said, well, what are you going to do? I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. You keep on with your prayers and everything. Anyway, that was really a ride. It was so much fun, with her, because she got away. She was old. She got away with everything, My grandmother that I'm speaking of never sat on the back of a bus. She rode on the front behind the driver. She would pull a cord maybe about 2 blocks from where I grew up here on 2nd Street, and he would get off, help her off with her bags. This was during segregation time. And I would stand on the porch, my mother and I, until the bus passed my house. And my mother said, now you can go and meet her. I didn't know until I was an adult why I couldn't go and meet her, wait there for her. I used to always say to my mother, we know what time the bus is. Let me be there when she gets off. Mama, no, you wait until the bus, passes the house. Then you can go and meet her. And I would always do that. And it dawned on me when I was an adult that she was sitting on the back and in the front of the bus. The driver thought she was white. And so, wait until the bus passes the house, then you go. My aunt in St. Augustine was a very successful business person. At one time, she owned maybe 40 houses in St. Augustine, had a laundromat, a grocery store. She was just an expert at what she was doing. And so, my grandmother, the bank was a big deal, when Auntie would go downtown to the bank, we'd all go too for the ride. And at one of the banks, they had orange juice for white customers only. There were little cups about like that. And so my grandmother said, well, I'm going to drink a cup for each of you. So she would go up and pour the orange juice, and we could see her out of the corner of her eye, and she said, one for Betty, one for Chris. And my aunt was very, very upset. Mother, why do you do that? All the orange juice that we have at home, have a store and you run out, you don't have to do that. I said, that's not the point. That's not the point. So Auntie would threaten us, don't you dare look at your grandmother, pretend we weren't with her. She married at 13. It was an arranged marriage. And her husband was 30. And she had, I think, twins when she was 14. They both died. And then she had my aunt who was in St. Augustine. So they were more like sisters than mother-daughter because she was very, very young. And she told us that on Sunday after church, well, in Florida, you start out with a coat or a jacket in the morning. By noon, church is out. It's warm, you shed the coat. She said her husband would take her coat and go home and let her stay and play with the kids in church because he knew that she still had that need to play with children. Her father was Caucasian. Her mother was a black Indian.
So why would
I don't
my
know.
history's not very.
I don't know why they had arranged marriages
Huh.
then.
And a black Indian.
And they were probably pretty wealthy for that time because she said that her mother sent her maid to live with her for a while to teach her how to cook and do things like that. This was Shady Grove. Way back up in the woods of Shady Grove.
Did any of the national world news events that had happened, did they affect you, your family, the community in any ways?
Well, I think the most profound world event was President Kennedy. That was my very first year teaching, and I was sick that day, and I was in the nurse's office asleep, and the nurse came to wake me up and tell me we were going home because school was closed for the rest of the day, and she said the president had been shot. I remember just almost being in a daze, in my mind. I was just wondering what was going to happen, if they were going to declare war. I was really frightened, didn't really know what to expect.
Yeah.
Oh, my salary my first year was $3,700. And I had a new car, a white Impala with the stick. It was an automatic transmission, but the gear was in the middle, and they call them bucket seats at the time. Neat. My grandmother paid the down payment for me so that I could buy the car. The superintendent was Tiny Talbot, and he called me personally at my home, when they were integrating the staff first, they were sending black teachers into white school and vice versa. And he called me and asked if I would be interested in going to one of the white schools. I assumed it was because I passed the national teacher exam. Because how else could he know me, you know? Which was no indication of what kind of teacher, you know, I was. Maybe it was because, you know, there were several teachers in my family, I don't know. But I told him that I wanted to stay at Williams. I felt that my first obligation was to my own people. So he said, well, I don't want to upset you then. Wasn't a whole lot of clubs and, you know, things like that. The cotton clubs were really for adults, you know.
Right. Oh, yeah.
By the time I was an adult, I was...
Right. Yeah, kind of the late 40s, 50s.
And during the time of Tiny Town, where you weren't to go in clubs or, you know, it was very... He knew everyone. He knew where you lived, phone numbers, everything. So that wasn't really acceptable for female teachers anyway, you know, to frequent bars or clubs.
So were you at Williams when some of the first white teachers came in?
No, I was in Miami
Okay.
when they integrated the middle of the school year. They took a whole slew of black teachers, sent them to suburban schools, and sent the white teachers into the inner city schools. I was teaching at an inner city school. Then it was Martin Luther King Elementary School, and I was shipped the middle of the year to Whispering Pines in south of Coconut Grove. My friends used to tease me, say it was teaching in Cuba, it was so far south. But it was a community that we didn't know existed, you know. Every home had a boat, you know, and only, I don't think I had any mothers that worked. The lowest paying was probably a professional basketball player, the lowest paying household. And, but they prepared the children well for us. They drew pictures, you know, black with blue eyes, you know, welcome the teachers. And we were questioned somewhat by parents as to credentials. I just said, well, you know, you can always go down to the Board of Education and ask to see my file, you know, so. But it was a tough time, It really took, you know, a lot of getting used to. But I requested a transfer back at the end of that school year, and I was able to go back. And I stayed there until I went to New Jersey. I had Hispanics and blacks when I started teaching there. But I did 1.5 years in Miami before I went to New Jersey. And when I went to New Jersey, it was almost like 50 years behind time. The kids were still sitting in rows. They would still go to the reading circle, a half circle with the teacher in the middle, their books on the floor and their hands folded. And we weren't doing that anymore. We were on the floor teaching reading, you know, and if the children, you know, sat up on their knees or crossed their legs in the chairs, we didn't. But it wasn't that way there, it was like this. And I have to take credit for sort of breaking down that barrier. The first time I was evaluated by a supervisor, my kids were at a round table, and I was sitting at the table with them for a reading. And of course then we had 3 reading groups. I had 2 groups working independently, you know, with an IA monitoring, and then I had the one group for developmental reading. And some legs were over the back of the chairs. You know, it was a very relaxed atmosphere. Well, she tore me apart with her evaluation. And I cried. And so I said, but you didn't hear my children read. I said, I want you to listen to them read. And they read for her, and she tore up the evaluation. So then, we eventually got rid of those rows, you know, the chairs in a row. And that rigidness, you know. Boys came in one door and girls in the other. We lined up to come into the school. But anyway, they made great strides. I had a lot of, after I established myself as being a good teacher and having children to come in and first grade and be able to read and do math, then I got a lot of requests to develop curriculums during the summer, revise the quarterly topic plans, write handbooks for teachers, and so that was the beginning of my other career.